What's up you guys, you're watching Team APS, Paul here, and in today's video I'm going to give you guys some budget replacement options for expensive meta cards. And unless you have like just the deepest pockets or some very understanding parents, these cards are tough to get a hold of, especially if you want to feel like you can still compete and still play. So I'm going to give you guys some replacement cards that don't cost nearly as much but oftentimes serve the same function, sometimes even better. Obligatory disclaimer here, these are replacement cards. That's to say that they will never completely fill the shoes of the cards that I'm talking about. So just keep that in mind. There'll never be a true replacement for some of the strong cards we got. And the cards we're going to go over today are Evenly Matched, Infinite Impermanence, and Ghost Belle Haunted Mansion. So let's hop right in. First things first is Evenly Matched. Now this card's actually been out for a while now and it's a really strong trap. You guys pretty much know what it does. At the end of the battle phase, you can activate it from your hand if you don't control any other cards. And it makes your opponent banish cards they have face down until they control the same amount of cards as you. So ideally, you'll be able to just use this from your hand at the end of a battle phase, yours or theirs, and make your opponent banish nearly their entire field. This is strong for pretty obvious reasons. It banishes the cards face down, which means they're basically unrecoverable. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy, and in fact, because it forces your opponent to do the banishing, even cards that are immune to traps can't actually get away from this card. So it's extremely strong, and right now it serves the purpose of breaking up those really strong, unbreakable boards, namely extra link boards from decks like Spirals and decks like Gokis, because they're going to be full of nightmare monsters that can't be targeted, can't be destroyed by card effects, or negating everything. But by using Evenly Matched, you can just kind of wipe them all away from the board, and they're usually powerless to stop it. But Evenly Matched also costs over $50, and while it seems like it's going to be getting reprinted in the Megatins, it's still a really long ways away, so what do we do in the meantime? Well, the replacements for this get a little bit tricky because it's evenly matched. It's a very niche card with a very specific, unique application. That said though, we can still kind of take it back a little to what the core purpose is, and that's breaking boards. Mass removal that gets rid of all the cards on the field, or as many of them as possible, in a way that is pretty low commitment and fairly tough to stop. So the first budget replacement card is the Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode. Now this one's gotten a lot of attention recently because of pretty obvious reasons. It's better than Kaiju's in breaking unbreakable boards because it tributes 3 of your opponent's monsters. And that's huge because these monsters get tributed completely as a cost just involved in summoning this card. So there is no way for your opponent to really combat that. The monsters are already gone as Raw Sphere mode hits the board. So being able to get rid of 3 monsters is huge because if you're facing a board full of nightmare monsters Griffin negating monster effects and stuff stopping them from being destroyed by battle and all that, you can just use Raw Sphere mode and take the 3 most troublesome ones off the board completely. What's really cool about this too is that if you're facing a nightmare deck, cards like Nightmare Corruptor Ibli that normally prevent you from special summoning won't actually prohibit you from using Raw Sphere mode, because Raw Sphere mode is actually a just regular kind of tribute summon. You can use it and you can't use Kaiju's in those same situations. So this is actually a really strong card and you can pick it up for pretty cheap prices. It's only a few bucks. I'll actually have a link to it, the TCGPLAYER link where you can buy it. But yeah, Raw Sphere mode does a really great job. Now that said, it does have some weaknesses. Your opponent will have to have at least 3 monsters for you to tribute, so sometimes this card can be dead if your opponent just gets 2 strong monsters out on the board. That said though, in those same situations, Evenly Matched would not necessarily be much better because it would still struggle to get rid of a lot of your opponent's cards. So these 2 cards have sort of a similar weakness in that way. Also, this card can be a little bit troublesome because you are giving your opponent a card. So even though you get rid of a lot of their powerful monsters, you do give them a monster that they can then use on their next turn to link up. And there are plenty of link monsters that just take, effect monsters, right? They can use the Raw Sphere mode and just link with it, because if they don't, it'll come back to you and then be a problem for them, so they're probably going to want to link it away. The next card is Storming Mirror Force. So Storming Mirror Force is actually a really useful card against these unbreakable boards that you normally need Evenly Matched to deal with, because Evenly Matched basically gets rid of these monsters in a non-targeting way that doesn't destroy or anything like that. These cards do the same thing. The only problem, of course, is that your opponent does have to be attacking you. But in that way, these cards aren't awful. I mean, you would normally be using Evenly Matched at the end of the battle phase. Still though, the disadvantage here is if you're going second, you'll have to set the Mirror Force and then run it back to your opponent for their turn for them to attack you. And at that point, if they see that you have cards set, they'll probably just try to get rid of them using maybe Nightmare Phoenix or some generic spell and trap removal. So these cards do become a bit unreliable in that way, but they offer some huge benefits. I mean, they will destroy all of your opponents, not destroy, send back all of your opponents face-up monsters that are in attack position, which means that Link monsters are completely vulnerable to this. They have to stay in attack position, so your opponent can't even use any funny business and try to switch them to defense mode before these cards happen. So that's really good, and it can get rid of an entire board. And whether you use Storming Mirror Force or Drowning Mirror Force, it doesn't really matter, because if it's Link monsters, they're just going to get sent back to the extra deck anyway. Being sent back to the extra deck can be a bit of a problem, though. That's another downside this has in comparison to Evenly Matched, because Evenly Matched banishes face down, where these cards will be completely inaccessible for the rest of the game. Having them back in the extra deck means that your opponent will be able to use them again. So this isn't a perfect solution, but it's decent. Next is Infinite Impermanence. Now, we actually talked about this card the other week where I said I don't think it's worth the price tag, but it doesn't matter because it's still really expensive. It's currently like $60 or $70, and while it's not a complete necessity that you need to play, a lot of the topping decks are using this card, and for good reason. It offers a lot of really strong advantages. Being a trap that you can activate from your hand during either player's turn is great as long as you have no cards in the field, kind of similar to Evenly Matched in that way. There are some budget replacements, but none of them quite cover as many bases as this card does. Still though, some of them do offer a few advantages. So the first one is the obvious Effect Veiler. Now, Effect Veiler does have some weaknesses, but it offers some advantages too. So you discard it during your opponent's main phase and you can negate one of their monster's effects. This means that you can stop, most search cards, something like Trickstar Candina, Predaplanal for Scorpio, those types of things all come to mind. And in addition to that, Effect Veiler is a monster, which means that it has some utility. You can use it as a level 1 tuner. You can use it to, just link material, or in a worst case scenario, it can just be set as a meat shield. And that's something that you don't necessarily get with Infinite Impermanence. But some downsides to Effect Veiler are the fact that it actually can only be used in your opponent's main phase. So if you, say, are going second and you happen to draw Effect Veiler, it's totally useless and you just kind of can't do anything with it until your opponent's main phase. And in those same situations, Infinite Impermanence would be better, because even if you draw it when you go second, you can still activate it from your hand if it's the first thing you do before you have any cards, and negate, say, a troublesome monster like Naturia Beast or something like that. Now, there are some other cards that kind of come close to Infinite Impermanence, but the main one that I want to go over here is Forbidden Chalice. Forbidden Chalice, I think, is a really good substitute because it's a quick play spell. It can be used during either player's turn. Of course, it would have to be set before you use it in the opponent's turn, so it doesn't give the flexibility that Infinite Impermanence does in that case. But Forbidden Chalice is still really strong. It's something that you can use in your own main phase that Effect Veiler doesn't get to do. And because it changes attack and defense values, it can actually be activated in the damage step, which is something that not even Infinite Impermanence gets to have. So you can use this as a way to stop certain effects in the damage step, or even let your monsters swing over your opponent's monsters in the battle phase, because you do give the monster a 400 attack point boost. So you can negate one of your own monster's effects and let it swing over something that's troublesome. That's really good. That flexibility, I think, is what helps it edge out Veiler in a lot of ways. And so those are the two really good, in my opinion, budget sort of alternatives to Infinite Impermanence. And last but not least, we've got Ghost Belle Haunted Mansion, a card that a lot of people kind of have mixed feelings about. People didn't know if this was going to be a really prominent meta card, and it seems like it's kind of finding its way into deck lists, to some people's surprise. So Ghost Belle Haunted Mansion is the new Ghost Girl Lolly hand trap on the block, who can negate anything that special summons a monster from the graveyard, adds a card from the graveyard to the hand or to the extra deck or really anywhere, and banishes a card from the graveyard. So any effect that does any of those things, it can stop. It's kind of like Ash Blossom in that way. It's sort of like a triple threat. Now, the thing about Ghost Belle is it's commonly being used right now to stop cards like Kagari, for example, and Sky Strikers that gets back one of the Sky Striker spell cards. You can use this to simply cut that effect out, negate it, and that's really cool. In addition, it's also useful because it's a tuner and it's level 3, and the Ghost Girls all have that nice little bit of extra usability functionality that they offer. But there are two budget cards that I think do a pretty good job of covering this girl's duties as well. So the first one is DD Crow. So DD Crow's actually been out for ages, and when Ghost Belle was first announced, DD Crow actually was cited as one of the cards that kind of does her job just as well, if not in some cases better. So DD Crow is another hand trap, so that's really cool. You don't lose any of the whole like flexibility that hand traps give you. And it can banish a card from your opponent's graveyard. So you just use DD Crow on whatever card your opponent is targeting with, say, Monster Reborn or Kaguri's Spell Recycling effect, and then poof, the card is gone. It's extremely useful. It can stop a lot of revival and recurrence effects. And for that reason, I really think that it nearly covers the role of Ghost Belle, and it's so cheap. The thing is, I mean, there was even a Sky Striker Trickstar deck list in the YCS New Jersey Top 32 that just opted to use DD Crow instead of Ghost Belle. It's actually in the TCG Player archive, so check that out. I'll try to link to it in the description. But yeah, so this card's great. It does all that stuff for you. And the next card is Called by the Grave, which I think does a similar purpose. So Called by the Grave lets you banish a card in the graveyard, and then whenever your opponent tries to resolve any effect of that same monster, it gets negated. That's for the rest of the turn and until the end of the next turn. So Called by the Grave is commonly used to stop hand traps. It's really effective against Ghost Ogre, Ash Blossom, Droll and Lockbird, all of those cards, because when your opponent sends it to the graveyard as a cost activates effect, you can just use Called by the Grave, banish it, and then the effects of any of that monster, like the one you just banished, get negated. So it's a really good anti-hand trap strategy. That said though, it can actually function similarly to DD Crow because you can just banish a monster. So for example, in the Trickstar matchup, if your opponent was using something like Trickstar Reincarnation's effect to summon a Trickstar from the graveyard, let's say they were going for Candina, then you can use Called by the Grave, banish the Candina that they were trying to summon to nullify that summoning effect, and then for the rest of the turn, they also can't use any more Candinas, and that actually goes until the end of the next turn. So if they try to normal summon Candina and use her search effect, that's also going to be nullified. This is extremely useful and actually really versatile, especially in decks that kind of involve using a lot of the same cards over and over and over again. What does that sound like? Sky Strikers. So yeah, you can use Call by the Grave and hit a Sky Striker, say Kaguri, that's in the graveyard to stop a future Kaguri that gets summoned. Now, something that's actually kind of really ironic, I think, in all of this is that Ghost Belle can actually stop Called by the Grave and DD Crow, so it's a little bit ironic that her two biggest rival cards she can't actually stop. But, I mean, with those things in mind, Ghost Belle does have its own set of weaknesses. It doesn't really destroy any card that does these things. So, like, if it's a face-up continuous card, Ghost Belle can negate activations of effects, but it won't destroy the card. That's actually similar to Ash Blossom. And it doesn't get rid of the card in the grave that they were targeting. So what I like about DD Crow and Called by the Grave is that they will banish the card and generally put it out of commission. So that concludes the video. Those are some budget replacements for 3 of the very expensive cards in the game right now. Evenly Matched, Infinite Impermanence, and Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, these are just replacements. They aren't necessarily going to be perfect kind of one-to-one substitutes for the real thing. Those are expensive cards, and they're expensive for a reason, and they're run for a reason. But if you're trying to save a bit of money, a lot of these replacements can do the job in a similar way, so you should look into them. It's gonna be it for the video, so let me know if you have any other budget replacement cards that you would suggest. Leave them down in the comments. I think it's a really interesting topic because right now Yu-Gi-Oh's gotten a bit expensive, and any way that we can save a penny or two is nice. So yeah, that's gonna be it. I will see you guys in the next video, so give it a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it, help me get to 100,000 subscribers, and I'll see you guys in the next one.